Lucy met the humans for the first time as she worked in a bar on Space Station Eichenbuch. She was actually surprised to even know that humans were going to be around, let alone see them, as they usually have trouble docking their metal ships with the semi-organic hull of space stations like this one. Normally, Lucy would hear customers walk in, claim how strong they are, how virile they are, and how dangerous they are, and then stand there in silence for a moment as they waited for a challenger. This was just normal. At least it was normal for that bar, as most of her customers are yokis like her. They would proceed to also sit and gaze at her as she moved along doing her job. Every once in a while, they would let their tentacles that protruded from their back drift up against her skin, most times just barely brushing against her, but sometimes the tentacles would reach out and seemingly slide or wrap around one of her legs. She would push them away as they slid up her legs to try and get under her outfit, an outfit that she found a bit too revealing for her liking. She thought this way because it's an outfit that seemed to be so short that just bending over would potentially expose her underneath, especially if she had her tail in any other position than straight down. Pushing her customers away also became dangerous as time progressed in the bar every single night. The more caffeine or O3 they would consume or inhale, the more intoxicated the locals and regulars would get, meaning that a stray hand, tentacle, or beverage from any customer might head her way violently in the middle of her shift. Because of this, she had to be on her hooves at all times. When she saw the humans walk in for the first time, everybody paused as they simply walked through the door. They paused not out of fear, but confusion. There was no loud announcement, no bravado, no challenges, just a half a dozen men and 2 women that walked in looking completely and totally spent from whatever they were doing, and quietly walked to a table. Lucy was shocked at this, just like the rest of them, and didn't actually want to go and speak with the humans, but eventually, hesitantly, walked over towards these humans, these new beings she's never, ever dealt with. She was worried that they would take offense to her even coming up. She worried and thought that perhaps, maybe they would simply attack her or do something. However, she gutted herself, swallowed hard, walked over, and as she did, she couldn't help but look them up and down and compare them. At least, compare them to her own species, that is. In general, there was nothing that really stuck out at first from these humans. They're bipedal like her species and many others, although there's no horns on the head at all. Almost all species have something, horns that stick out of the forehead, some that curl back, some that stick out towards the back of the skull, but there was no horns at all. She looked and realized that they have binocular vision, very similar, if not exactly placed where her species is. The ears were similar, but slightly more rounded than hers. To her surprise, the nose, it was exactly the same. Thankfully, they still just had 2 arms with the same number of digits as her species. However, as she looked at them, they didn't have any type of discerning colors. No feathers or anything sticking out. Nothing was bright, so I guess they're not poisonous. They're just plain colors, especially the fur that was on their head. It seemed as though it was just a natural color, even though it was different colors for all of them. It didn't seem to be adjusted at all. As she came up to the table, she realized that the males, they don't have any tentacles coming out their back, which was very different than her species. What was also different was the musculature of the upper appendages of these humans, which was extremely large and seemed to be dense, as it visibly could be seen through the skin as it moved up and down as it flexed. She got very nervous at this. She realized that some of the males had fur on their face and some didn't at all, but it was very strange. She looked at the females and realized that they're shaped, at least body-wise, very similar to herself. There's two mammaries right where they're supposed to be, the standard hourglass shape of all females of the galaxy, yet it seemed as though the females tend to have much longer hair coming from the body. Only from the head, though. There's none on the face at all. This was odd. She also looked and realized that even though she could see the upper arms of the females, they do not seem to have as much musculature, but what they do have is clearly defined. What stood out most to her with these humans was not their physiology difference, no, but the mentality difference. They all spoke softly, directly, courteously, and with purpose. Lucy could already hear the locals behind her talking poorly towards these humans. As she took the food order, she had to actually drown out the comments of how weak the human must be. They don't even have tentacles. Look at that. They don't even have horns. What's wrong with these creatures? Oh, look, they're so passive. Oh, I'm sure I could take one down. Probably could break its neck off. All these comments in the background just kept coming as Lucy tried to focus. That is, until she asked the humans what they wanted as a beverage, and the humans asked for ethyl alcohol. This made the entire dive bar go dead silent except for the music in the background. Everyone just looked at them. Ethyl alcohol? Isn't that a toxin? Don't they use that to degrease engines? What the hell are the humans going to do about drinking that? Really? Can they do that? Everyone was questioning about this, even as the beverages got there, and sure enough, the humans turned up their glasses after, for some reason, clinking them together, and then consuming it, saying how weak the ethyl alcohol was, asking the bartender for something stronger. Everybody was confused at this. Well, their digestive system must be different. Maybe they're not as weak as they thought, but then again, maybe they just spit poison. Nobody really knew. Upon getting their food, it's clear that the humans have much larger appetites than any others, as each and every one of them eats at least 4 times the normal meal size and consume enough ethyl alcohol to kill everybody in the bar at least twice over. But with all that, they don't bother anyone as they eat and drink and just seem to keep to themselves. They don't even bother to look around much. That is, until a local tried to fully remove Lacey's skirt with his tentacles while holding her tight with one of his arms. They made such a racket that everybody at the bar was looking, even the humans, seeing this. Every human male that had just finished their meal stood up quickly, making all the seats screech on the floor and many of them fall down. Everyone saw this, and in silent defiance, the humans stood there, staring, not ever blinking, focused with what seemed like a death glare. At first, the Yukis just looked back at the humans, and then, as Lucy struggled to get herself free, she got slapped across the face by the free hand of the Yuki that held her, and yelled, "Submit, woman!" At that moment, with incredible speed, the human males darted across the room, grabbing the male and tossing him aside with just one arm, making him slam into the wall. And in that same moment, the other human males actually pulled Lucy back behind them. One actually reaches down, grabs her skirt from the floor, and hands it back to Lucy as the human males form a wall between her and the table of intoxicated Yukis. Before Lucy has time to even figure out what the hell is going on, the 2 female humans grab her and pull her farther back and try to comfort her a little bit while trying to put her skirt back on at the same time. Lucy is confused at the act of kindness and protection as the male still stood there. She's getting her skirt back on and extremely glad that she's always wore a very dense undergarment that she found a bit uncomfortable, but she always wore it underneath. It's not a lot of fabric, but without the key to open up the front and release it, nothing's going to get through, and it has saved her parts several times. Lucy looks at the human males, as only one of them is actually facing the perpetrator. The rest seem to be watching the rest of the crowd. A male perpetrator that's so dazed from hitting the wall that he's pointing and yelling at the humans, but he's actually pointing in the wrong directions. Eventually, realizing what's going on, he begins to get in the human's face, and the male Yuki begins yelling about how the humans want to take over, to dominate the species, to take over this station, to make sure they have control of all this, constantly spinning a yarn to make it seem as this one act is an insult to every Yuki in the bar. In fact, every Yuki on the station. The bad part is, it worked. As he ranted on, every Yuki with a bit of liquid courage inside them stood and prepared to fight. The humans simply repositioned themselves to make sure nobody could get behind them, but they didn't back down, not one step. A few Yukis struck out towards the humans and found out quick that the human musculature isn't just for show. With each strike to the face, or the body, or wherever it might be, there's a sickening crack of bones as the body goes flying backwards. To no one's surprise, the instigator is actually stepping farther and farther back as the fight continues to escalate, continuously trying to back away from the fight, realizing that he is severely outmatched. But as more and more realize that they are outmatched by these outnumbered humans, they back down more, not wanting to end up being torn apart. The human that first struck out, tossing the perpetrator aside, seemed to have locked on to this instigator and was not going to let him escape. Realizing he's cornered, and with others telling him to fight to prove himself, this instigator looked like he just said "fuck it" in his eyes and charged, only to have a large human hand move at the speed of "fuck you," catching the instigator by the neck and slowly raising him up. In desperation, the instigator whacked at the arm of the human, realizing he can't reach towards the human's face to strike him. He kept hitting the human's arm more and more and more. In desperation, the instigator reached out with one of his tentacles and slapped the human in the face, causing the man to actually flinch as this struck right next to his eye. In a moments later, the Yuki actually spun the other way, whipping his other tentacle around, and the human caught it with his spare hand, wrapped the tentacle twice with his hand as though he's coiling up a rope, and then proceeded to rip the tentacle clean off the Yuki's body. The human then released the instigator, and he dropped to the ground in severe pain, screaming like a stuck pig. There was no blood, as these tentacles are prehensile, and they actually lose them once in their lifetime, similar to the way humans actually lose their baby teeth. However, it will take a long, long time for it to grow back. However, this still hurts a lot. The human that just dropped him simply stood there with the limp tentacle in his hand, holding it up as though it's some sort of trophy. Then, slowly turning, looking across the crowd while he held it in his hand, said, "Anyone else?" As all the locals seemed to look at each other and back away, the man simply tossed the tentacle into the crowd, striking one in the face who actually said the word "ew, gross." At that point, all the Yukis backed away, lowering their heads, not even wanting to look the humans in the eye. Realizing the fight is over, the human males return to the table. However, they do not turn their backs. Instead, they keep their eyes on the crowd and back up more and more until they reach the table. Realizing that everything is calmed down, they can finally turn to the reason why this all started. And Lucy was surprised, as all these human males started to show concern for her. They also were surprised by the name when they asked, and it surprised everyone, and she had to be told that it was a common name in the human language. This surprised Lucy to the point where she actually opened her jaw for a moment trying to figure out something to say, but instantly closed it as she was just flabbergasted. The humans electronically paid their bill, and then they simply turned to leave. That is, after they convinced Lucy to leave with them, telling her that they worried about reprisal against her once they were gone. They didn't know what would happen. They already saw what one drunk asshole would do. They worried about a whole bunch of guys who were liquored up and their pride was hurt. They didn't even want to think about that. In fact, one or two of the humans actually shuddered a little, and it seemed like he suddenly got ready for another fight. However, this was enough to convince Lucy to come with them. As they walked out, though, two humans got closer to the bar, close enough where the bartender actually backed up just a little bit. Then both the humans tossed one pure piece of emerald jade to the bartender, this being a fairly valuable gem in this area. And the older of the two simply said, "Sorry about the mess," and they turned to leave, following their friends. Lucy was grateful that she was given time to actually change out of her work attire, as she wanted to actually leave the area and walk around the station, but she didn't want to walk around in something that looked so, well, slutty. She was also very interested in learning more about these humans, the humans that, without a word, had come to her aid. The one that had taken down the instigator seemed actually interested in her, to the point of claiming that if she was tired, he could just carry her out. In fact, he reached his hand underneath her thighs and then lifted her up, commenting on how absolutely light she was, although she was a little worried about this, and instantly wrapped her tail around his thick, muscular arm, and it was at that one point that she realized exactly how much power humans truly have. She could also see the two human females with human males, with their arms around their necks as they walked, not trying to hurt them, but it seems as though this was some sort of affectionate gesture. She didn't know exactly what was going to happen, but she did know one thing, as she was thinking that these humans seemed very interesting. Hello everybody, this is Syntax. Thank you for joining me on today's short story. Now before I go, I like to say the winner of the first round of the Find the Syntax Name in the Thumbnail game goes to Erica Gem. Congratulations. Also, I need to send out some big thank yous to a bunch of my supporters, and those would be Sir Prozac and Pancakes, Brian Kemp, SS Demon, MTF Guard, Guardian Sage, Erica Gem, Julius Boone, and Jan Yeager. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel. Everybody else, I'll see you on the next one. This is Syntax, punching out.